here is the list of all the children. This is Vera Diamantova, now Vera Gissing. We did find her name on his list. Vera Gissing is with us here tonight. Hello, Vera. And I should tell you that you are actually sitting next to Nicholas Winton.
One of the most popular television programs of the 1980s was BBC magazine show That's Life. It regularly pulled in more than 20 million viewers each week, but few episodes were as powerful as the one broadcast on 27 February 1988. Near the end of the show, host Esther Ranson produced a scrapbook that listed the names of hundreds of mostly Jewish children brought to Britain from Czechoslovakia in 1939, from under the noses of the Nazis. One of the names was Vera Diamantova, a 10-year-old whose parents had arranged for her and an older sister to start a new life in Britain. Vera was in the studio audience, and as the camera picked her out, viewers saw an old man next to her. Neither he nor Vera knew they had been set up by That's Life. Amid gasps from the audience, Ranson announced that the old man was called Nicholas Winton, and that 49 years earlier, he had been instrumental in saving the life of Vera and hundreds of other children. The two embraced, and as Winton wiped a tear from his eye, Vera leaned in and whispered, "Thank you." On the face of it, Winton was an unlikely savior of Czech children. Born into privilege in North London in 1909 and privately educated, by the late 1930s he had become a successful stockbroker. But though he was on the surface the quintessential English gentleman, Winton's lineage was foreign. The family name was Wertheim, German Jewish, and although Nicholas was raised a Christian, it wasn't until 1938 that he and the rest of the family changed themselves to Winton to underline where their loyalties lay. A fervent anti-fascist, Winton joined the Labour Party. At the end of December 1938, he accepted an invitation from a fellow activist to travel to Prague to see the plight of Czech Jews firsthand. Arriving in Prague on New Year's Eve, Winton was introduced to Doreen Warner. She was a young 34-year-old English academic. She had been in Prague since 13th October, motivated by a sense of shame at the manner in which many felt the British government had betrayed the Czechs. She recalled of her decision to abandon her Rockefeller Fellowship in the U.S. to travel to Prague. But then, there was one agreement that was a pain in the ass, probably the most pathetic agreements that erupted more fire than saving it. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain had signed the Munich Agreement, which allowed Adolf Hitler to annex the Sudetenland, the region of western Czechoslovakia bordering Germany. It precipitated an exodus of more than 100,000 refugees from the Sudetenland into the rest of Czechoslovakia, which for the time being remained free from Nazi occupation. And Warner wasn't the only Briton disgusted by the Munich Agreement. Many charities and organizations sprang up to assist those Czechs wanting to flee the Nazis. Hitler's armies had marched into the borderlands of Czechoslovakia, forcing Jewish families to flee their homes and seek refuge inland. That winter, as the light of Hanukkah and Christmas drew near, so did the darkness of ethnic cleansing. Meanwhile, 800 miles away in London, a 29-year-old English stockbroker, Nicholas Winton, was preparing for a ski vacation in Switzerland. But just days before his departure, a friend called from Prague. "Nicky," he said, "forget the skis. You need to see what's happening here." Nicky, the son of Jewish German immigrants, had a background in international banking and was fluent in German and French. Long interested in world politics, he was naturally curious and immediately changed his plans. Nicky arrived in the Czech capital on New Year's Eve. There, in the throes of winter, he found sprawling encampments of refugee families, mostly Jewish, huddled in tents and makeshift huts. At best, they were trapped. Visas for adults were nearly impossible to obtain, much less for entire families. Some wanted to escape, and others were determined to stay, but most agreed something had to be done to safeguard their children now before it was too late. The supply of visas from Britain was incredibly slow, while America refused to help entirely despite Winton writing letters to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Winton told the New York Times in 2001, and he was very furious at U.S. He recalls that if America had said yes to me, we could have saved 3 times as many. The situation in the UK was also complicated by the caveats placed on accepting refugees. Each child had to be sponsored to the age of 18 by a British family to the sum of $50, an amount of money that few had at the time. Nicky turned this problem over in his mind. If it's not impossible, then there must be a way to do it. Working with other organizations, a plan emerged. By special waiver, children could leave the country without their parents, as long as host families abroad took them in. As word of the plan spread, parents lined the hallways and staircases of Nicky's hotel, begging for their little ones to be included. If they could get their children out of the country safely, they would find a way to join them. 3 weeks later, when Nicky's holiday vacation came to an end, he carried home the names and photographs of literally hundreds of children entrusted to him by their parents. Back in London, Nicky worked at the stock exchange by day and coordinated the rescue by night. To expedite the effort, he borrowed stationery from the British Refugee Committee, adding the words "Children's Section" and calling a meeting of one to appoint himself honorary secretary. Using that title, he wrote to various governments for help. Several declined, but the British Home Office agreed, as long as Nicky provided a $50 guarantee for each child, the equivalent of more than 4,000 American dollars today. With the assistance of his mother and a growing circle of helpers, Nicky threw himself into recruiting host families, raising funds, and securing visas. For 9 months, the work continued. And for 9 months, children traveled by train and ferry to England. Through that spring and summer of 1939, as train whistles blew and steam filled the skies, parents waved goodbye, pleading for the strength that only God could provide. All too soon, war was declared, and the Czech border closed. At final count, 669 children had been rescued. With few exceptions, their families perished, never to be seen again. It was to the most prominent of these, the British Committee for Refugees from Czechoslovakia, BCRC, that Warner offered her services when she arrived in Prague. Her focus was on assisting political refugees to find a way to leave Czechoslovakia for Britain, and Winton quickly saw how he could be of assistance. Winton wrote to his mother in early January 1939, "Miss Warner has already asked me to be secretary of a children's committee for Czechoslovakia, which I suggested should be formed. It will mean a lot of work." Some of that work he delegated to his mother, such as inquiring of the Home Office in London what guarantees were needed to bring a child into Britain. In the meantime, Winton began to break down some of the layers of bureaucracy that were hindering the work of the BCRC in Prague. It was a complex challenge, but Winton's motto was, "If something is not impossible, then there must be a way to do it." Winton's determination to help the children was strengthened by an incident he witnessed in Prague on 11 January 1939, when he encountered a crowd of belligerent Czech youths marching down the street and shouting animatedly. He explained this in a letter to his mother. "I found myself standing next to another inoffensive-looking man, and I asked him what it had all been about. He told me it was an anti-Jewish procession, and the shouting was anti-Jewish slogans." This wasn't the only sinister incident that Winton experienced. He had the feeling he was being followed, a hunch confirmed by Warner, who said she and the rest of the BCRC in Prague were under surveillance by German agents. On 14th January, Winton escorted a British MP, Eleanor Rathbone, to one of the growing number of camps in Czechoslovakia that now housed an estimated 250,000 refugees. Marion Pritchard was a Dutch American, and she was a student. A social worker in Amsterdam in 1942, Pritchard was outraged at the Nazis' persecution of Jews and began registering Jewish children as her own and placing them in safe houses. She organized food and medical care, and even shot dead a local Nazi collaborator who had broken into her house looking for Jews. Pritchard recalls, "By 1945, I had lied, stolen, cheated, deceived, and even killed. But in doing so, she had saved the lives of more than 150 Jews. She was later honored as righteous among the nations." When war broke out, Jane Haining was working for the Scottish Mission School in Budapest as the matron of a girls' boarding house. Called home by the mission, Haining refused to leave. He wrote in his letters that, "If these children need me in days of sunshine, how much more do they need me in days of darkness?" For the next 5 years, Haining sheltered scores of Jewish refugees who arrived from Nazi Europe. Haining was arrested when the Nazis invaded Hungary in 1944 and was sent to Auschwitz. She didn't return. She too was recognized as righteous among the nations. Varian Fry was the first American to be honored as righteous among the nations. Fry was a journalist who, in 1940, helped found the Emergency Rescue Committee, which operated in France. He arrived in Marseille in August 1940 and remained for 13 months, organizing the escapes of more than 2,000 dissidents and refugees, many of them Jewish. Deported to the U.S. by Vichy France, Fry was one of the first reporters to draw American attention to the Holocaust in a 1942 newspaper titled "The Massacre of the Jews in Europe" in the New Republic magazine. However, he continued, he believed he would be more effective if he was based in London, and it would be wonderful if she could lend a hand. If I can possibly avoid it, I don't want to work anywhere near any of the existing committees, he told her. From experience, this end they can only retard the work. I therefore need someone practically the whole time I'm at work. A significant factor in Winton's decision to return to London was a $4 million fund set up by the British government to assist Sudeten refugees. With Warrener in Prague, the plight of the children would be best served if Winton was in Britain to organize their dispersal when they arrived. He is ideal for the job, Warrener wrote to the BCRC in London. He has enormous energy, businessman methods, knows the situation perfectly. Winton spent much of February organizing with the Home Office the requirements to bring each child from Prague to Britain. These were a $50 guarantee, equivalent to approximately $3,200 in 2019, a medical certificate and the name of a foster parent. The first train carrying children, one of the so-called Kindertransport, left Prague on 14th of March with 20 boys and girls on board. The next day, Germany invaded Czechoslovakia, and the need to evacuate more children took on a greater urgency. Fortunately, Winton's role in Prague had been taken over by Trevor Chadwick, a teacher from Swanage in Dorset, who had first come to the Czech capital in early March to collect 3 children for his school. Chadwick and Warrener now had to deal not with shadowy German agents, but strutting Gestapo officers. Winton greeted Vera and the other children upon the train's arrival in London, and among the foster parents and other well-wishers was a reporter from the New Statesman magazine. "I have seldom seen a more moving sight," wrote the journalist. Policemen kept a gangway for the crocodile, which was led off to a gymnasium and curtained down the middle. The children sat on benches on one side of the curtain, the parents were on the other. As each name was called out, the child went through an opening in the curtain and was welcomed by its new parents on the other side. The train carrying the Diamant sisters was the last one Chadwick waved off from Prague. The Czech capital was no longer safe for British charity workers, and in June he returned to the UK, as Warrener had done a few weeks earlier. In July, the BCRC was replaced by the Czech Refugee Trust Fund and a government official called Walter Creighton, and then he took on Chadwick's role. His official status got more protected. 3 more trains left Prague that summer, including one on 1st of July that transported 241 children to London, the largest number yet. The 9th was scheduled to depart on 1st September with 250 boys and girls, but it never left Prague. That morning, Germany invaded Poland, setting Europe and the world on the path to war. Winton formed the children's section of the British Committee for Refugees from Czechoslovakia with other volunteers and coordinated the country's Kindertransport operation. The program was set up by the British government in 1938 to allow unaccompanied Jewish children under 17 to stay in the UK with a foster family as long as they secured a $50 guarantee for their eventual return ticket. Evacuation efforts were up and running in Germany and Austria, but not Czechoslovakia. That is, until Winton came along. He chipped in to cover costs, dealt with the endless red tape, and occasionally forged travel documents and bribed officials. From spring 1939 until the start of the war, hundreds of children, most of them Jewish, left their parents to travel alone or with their siblings from Prague's main train station to Liverpool Street Station in London, crossing Germany and the Netherlands before taking a ferry from Hook of Holland. Each child was given an identity tag with their name and a number to hang round their neck. Leah Lesser, a former midwife based in Birmingham, who was 8 when she made the journey, she has been through that hellish experience, can we listen to her interview, and she said the platform was full of children, parents, babies in arms. Everybody was upset. I was very upset and very bewildered. My father didn't want me to leave. When the trains entered Germany, soldiers routinely boarded to cause disruption, leaving many kids in tears. Eva Paddock, who now lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts, was only 3 when she left with her older sister, Milena, who was 9. The only thing I can remember was that I was extremely seasick on the boat, and somebody gave me bananas. Fieldsand was picked up in Germany with his older brother, Arthur. The boys had first caught a train from Vítkov near Opava in the Sudetenland. He remembers that moment, and he remembers Winton. He says Winton diverted one of his trains and picked us up in Hanover, leaving their hometown. My mother took her wristwatch off and said, "This is for you to remember us by." That was a big shock to me. I didn't know what to make of it. There is another lady, Renate Collins, 90, who also have had terrible memories of the past. She left when she was 6. For some children who were unaware of the high stakes involved. The trip started out as a more lighthearted experience. I had pictures of where I was going and the people I was meeting. They had a picture of me. Her family had already exchanged a few letters with her foster parents, a reverend and his wife from the Rhondda Valley in South Wales. I probably thought I was having a nice holiday. Another one of the boys was Peter Schiller. He was a retired doctor and psychotherapist who lived in London. He recalls, "I didn't think it was scary because it was quite an adventure for a 7-year-old to be put on a train and sent off to an unknown destination. There were 9 trains in total, but the last one, carrying 250 children, the largest group, never arrived. It was due to depart on 1st September 1939, but that day, Hitler invaded Poland and Germany closed its borders. Most of the children on board are believed to have died in concentration camps. Many of the children who reached the UK never saw their parents again. 6 million Jews were murdered by the Nazis in the Holocaust, in concentration camps, extermination camps, and elsewhere. Collins was adopted by her foster parents and went on to work for the British Overseas Airways Corporation. Her father and uncle died in Auschwitz, and she was told her mother and grandmother were killed in Treblinka. She heard the news of her parents' deaths when she was 12. "I was very shocked," she says, "but in the back of my mind I didn't really want to go back to Prague. I wanted them to be alive, but I didn't want to go back." Lesser says that my father starved to death in Auschwitz and my mother died in a concentration camp, who was adopted by a schoolteacher in Anglesey. Fieldsand has spent years trying to find out what happened to his parents, although he believes they probably died in Auschwitz. "Most of my close family died in the various camps. Obviously, it's painful. One of the things one has to battle through is anger and pain and learning the task of forgiveness, which I think, eventually, I have achieved." He was taken in by a family from Sheffield. A few children were happily reunited with their families. Paddock's mother and father made it to England separately. The family ended up living in a council flat just down the road from her foster parents, a local Labour Party secretary and his wife, in Ashton-under-Lyne, Lancashire. Paddock was very happy, and points out that Radcliffes helped my mother learn English and were part of our lives until they died. They attended her wedding in 1955. They were loving, adoring foster parents. The first time most of the children heard of Winton and his role in their escape from the Nazis was in 1988, when the BBC covered his heroic achievement in 2 episodes of the television show That's Life. In a now famous clip from the 2nd episode, the unsuspecting Winton is seated in the audience with his wife, Greta, as the host, Esther Ranson, asks, "Is there anyone in our audience tonight who owes their life to Nicholas Winton?" He is visibly shocked when most of the audience stands up. Even the other people in the audience had no idea that they were surrounded by fellow Kindertransport children. They had been invited to the show after an appeal, asking people who had been saved by Winton to get in touch with the That's Life team. Until then, Winton had not talked about his part in the rescue of these children for nearly 50 years. Even his wife, Greta, knew nothing about it until she found an old scrapbook of her husband's in their attic in 1988. It was stuffed with photographs, letters from the families and names of the children he had saved. Only then did he reveal what he had done. She gave the scrapbook to Elizabeth Maxwell, a Holocaust researcher who was married to the newspaper publisher Robert Maxwell. When Robert heard about Winton, he wrote an article in the Sunday People, which led to the That's Life special. Winton was dubbed Britain's Schindler by the press in reference to the German businessman Oskar Schindler, who saved 1,200 Jews from the Holocaust. Eva Paddock saw That's Life and contacted Winton. "I wrote and said we'd like to come to Maidenhead for a cup of tea." His response was, Nobody comes for a cup of tea, you come for the day. So my husband and I spent a wonderful day with him and Greta. In the garden alone with Winton after lunch, Paddock tried to thank him for everything he had done. He wasn't very interested in being thanked. He was interested in what my life had become. That's who he was. Being able to see Winton in person gave the grown-up children a very real sense of closure, especially for the people who never did see their parents again. He actually became everybody's grandfather, she says. He became close to many of them, and the group called themselves Winton's children. Some became friends until his death in 2015 at the age of 106. Fieldsend kept in touch after meeting Winton at That's Life. She says, "My wife and I used to go to see him quite often to have coffee and a chat. We went out for meals. He loved the Maidenhead harvester. Winton was guest of honor at our golden wedding anniversary. It was a real privilege to give a small token of thanks. Winton's daughter, Barbara, also organized gatherings for the Kindertransport children, which Schiller attended. He was probably one of the most introverted people I had met in my life. He was certainly an incredibly impressive man, but not one that wanted to talk about it." Winton was finally honored for his Kindertransport work when he was knighted in 2003 for services to humanity. In 2009, a private passenger train named the Winton traveled from Prague to London, following the original Kindertransport route, as a tribute to Winton. Lesser brought one of her daughters to meet the train. He loved helping people, she says. It was something that came naturally to him. A statue of Winton protectively looking after two children, one clutching his neck, stands proudly in Prague's main railway station. But his lasting legacy is the many lives he saved, including Lord Alfred Dubs, the Labour peer and former MP, immunologist Leslie Baruch Brent, the poet Gerda Meyer, the filmmaker Carol Rice, and Paddock's sister, Lady Milena Grenfell Baines. Paddock says, "I owe him 3 children, 3 grandchildren, a great-grandchild, and a new one about to arrive. None of that would have happened without him. He was an amazing man. How many families would not be here to tell the tale otherwise?" Lesser says, "If I hadn't gone on the transport, I would have been killed with my mother." Collins gives talks about her life story and was awarded the British Empire Medal in 2020 for services to Holocaust education. "I'm very grateful to this country. Nobody else wanted us, but Britain took us in." Fieldsend says, "One of my grandchildren is named Nicholas, and one of my great-grandchildren is called Arthur Winton. Have they been told about what Winton did for him yet? They are still too young to know the story, but they will be told. Winton, Chadwick, and Warner saved the lives of hundreds of children, but for decades their deeds went unrecognized. When Chadwick and Warner died in the 1970s, barely a mention was made of their passing. There was a brief notice in the Times when Warner died in December 1972, with a colleague in the BCRC in Prague describing how Doreen was the best possible company in bad times, and it was a rewarding experience to work with someone of such competence and compassion. It was the powerful reunion with Vera Diamant on That's Life that turned the global spotlight on Winton and the work of the BCRC nearly half a century earlier. For the most part, records of Winton's actions were confined to his extensive scrapbook from the time, which included the names and photographs of thousands of children. The majority he was unable to save, but many who survived because of his ingenuity. In 1988, Winton's wife Greta passed the scrapbook to her friend Elizabeth Maxwell, a Holocaust researcher and the wife of the newspaper magnate Robert Maxwell. It was, undeniably, an incredible story, appearing soon in Maxwell's Sunday People and then on That's Life. Ranson, who was friends with Elizabeth, was aware that Winton had wanted to reunite the children with the photos he had in his possession, but had no idea how he'd go about it. She deployed the show's team of researchers to find as many of the now-grown refugees as they could before staging the surprise reunion for television. A less public reunion took place several months later, with Elizabeth Maxwell organizing a private event for Winton and many of the Kindertransportees he rescued. The scrapbook that was such a mine of information to Esther Ranson had been presented to Winton by a BCRC volunteer in 1939 as a memento of their enterprise. Niggy was once asked, "Why did you keep the scrapbook a secret?" "I didn't keep it a secret," he said. "I just didn't talk about it. Perhaps that's because Nicky knew he had more good to do in his life, more than could be contained in any book, for gifts of goodness are truly endless. As we are blessed, we bless others, and the giving goes on." During that last winter before the war, Jewish parents in Czechoslovakia were not able to celebrate Hanukkah in all the customary ways. But they knew that in the Hanukkah menorah, the single center candle lights all of the others. The light of God's goodness in just one person can bring light to many, now and for generations to come, which invites us to ask these questions of ourselves. What light will we bring to others? What stories will fill the scrapbooks of our lives? For some, it will be helping refugees in war-torn lands. For others, it will be visiting a lonely neighbor or lifting up a downcast friend. Whatever we do, the spark of our tiny effort can fill this world with light, and we should always tell a story of hope and peace that never ends. But as heartening as each train's departure was, so too was it a tragic tableau of train platforms filled with sobbing parents saying goodbye to their own children and leaving themselves to the awful fate that their children were now escaping. Of course, some parents didn't cry, and those stories are perhaps even more heartbreaking. As one man who Nicholas Winton saved later recalled, "My parents, in order to get me on the train, misled me into believing I was going on an adventure, a holiday to stay with my Uncle Hans Popper in Folkestone, England. They did not even cry and suppressed their emotions to not alarm me. I had no idea that it was the last time I would see my father alive, and that they were destined to the hellhole of Auschwitz." Susanna Marashova, one of the children Nicholas Winton rescued, and one of the very few whose parents actually survived the war and were thus able to see their child again, likewise recounted harrowing scenes at the train station. All of the parents were crying and waving. I can still see them today. I can remember the parents' hands up and our noses pressed to the glass, and that gave me the idea of the parting. The most frequently uttered sentence along the platform was, "See you soon." Scenes like these would play out upon the departure of all 8 Winton trains, the last in early August. The 9th was set to depart on September 1st. However, it was on that day that Germany invaded Poland and World War II officially began. The storm that Winton and others like him had long seen coming had finally arrived. Its effects were swift and brutal. Winton told the New York Times in 2015, "We had 250 families waiting at Liverpool Street that day in vain. If the train had been a day earlier, it would have come through. But while most, if not all of those children, and as many as 1.5 million others, died during the Holocaust, Nicholas Winton's legacy rests upon the 669 or more he saved. That legacy, however, took decades to fully come to light. Winton insists he wasn't heroic. Although Nicholas Winton's wife, Greta Gelstrup, and a few others quite close to him knew of Winton's deeds, he did not discuss them and certainly kept them out of the public eye. That changed in 1988 when Gelstrup rummaged about the family attic and found Winton's hidden scrapbook, filled with the names and photos of the children he saved. Winton brushed it off, even suggesting that she throw the scrapbook away. But Gelstrup was quick and said, "You can't throw those papers away. They are children's lives." Not only did Gelstrup not throw the papers away, she shared them with a Holocaust historian. This soon led to international media coverage, and over the ensuing 3 decades, a long list of honors and memorials bestowed upon him from several national governments. But through it all, Nicholas Winton remained modest about his heroics during the Holocaust. Instead of keeping the spotlight upon himself, Winton preferred to champion Doreen Warner and Trevor Chadwick, his associates who remained on the ground in Prague after Winton had gone back to England. He told The Guardian, "I wasn't heroic because I was never in danger. The That's Life appearance that shared Winton's story with the world nevertheless. The tributes for Nicholas Winton rolled in until his death at the age of 106 on July 1, 2015, the anniversary of the largest, 241 children, of all the evacuations that he'd arranged 76 years before. Even today, new Winton tributes continue to emerge. Yet of all the thanks and honors he ever received, the one that still most captivates the public and best puts a human face on his heroism is the one that helped initiate the original media storm shortly after his wife found his scrapbook in 1988. The producers of the BBC program That's Life had invited Winton to sit in the audience for a show without quite telling him why, or that some of the very people he'd rescued from the Holocaust as children a half-century ago would join him in the audience. Likewise, at least some of the now-adult Winton's children, as they're often called, had no idea that their rescuer would be in the studio audience right along with them. In the years following this reunion, Nicholas Winton would still downplay the moment, just as he did on his 1954 campaign leaflet in Maidenhead. The small section on the reunion from his 2014 interview piece with The Guardian states that he was not best pleased to have been tricked for the purposes of instant television drama and bucketfuls of tears. Of course, when the reunion happened in that studio, one can't miss the fact that Nicholas Winton stuck 2 fingers underneath his glasses to wipe away his own. Honestly, what makes his life super interesting and gives you that magic boost? It would be 2 things: his resilience and helping people in the riskiest of time. When asked during one of his final interviews in 2014 why he did what he did in the run-up to the Second World War, he answered, "Some people revel in taking risks, and some go through life taking no risks at all. I work on the motto that if something's not impossible, there must be a way to do it.